I knew I had already lost the moment I stepped into the building. Not because I was late, not because I was unprepared, but because I didn't look like the kind of man this place wanted to listen to. The lobby of Westbridge Systems was quiet in that polished, expensive way that made you lower your voice without realizing it. Marble floors reflected the ceiling lights like frozen water. Glass walls framed people who moved quickly, confidently, as if hesitation had been trained out of them years ago. Everyone else waiting for the interview looked exactly how modern corporate America preferred now young sharp, comfortable behind glowing screens and tailored confidence. I adjusted my jacket. It was the same one I'd worn to hospital waiting rooms, courthouse hallways, and interviews that ended with polite emails thanking me for my time. I could already feel it happening again, the brief glances, the smiles that never reached the eyes, the unspoken decision forming before I ever introduced myself. They didn't see the years I spent analyzing markets before buzzwords replaced judgment. They didn't see the decade I stepped away to care for family when walking away felt like the only decent choice. They saw a man who didn't belong in the room. And as the elevator doors closed behind me, one thought settled heavy and certain in my chest. This interview wasn't about whether I was qualified. It was about whether they had already decided I wasn't. The ride-up was silent. The numbers climbed steadily each floor, another reminder of how far removed this world felt from the one I'd lived in for years. When the doors opened, a receptionist greeted me with a practiced smile and pointed toward a glass-walled waiting area. Her eyes flicked briefly to my resume, then back to her screen. Nothing rude, nothing obvious. Just enough to let me know I was already categorized. I took a seat near the corner. Across from me sat two other candidates. One tapped confidently on a sleek laptop earbuds dangling casually from his neck. The other scrolled through charts on a tablet, nodding slightly, as if rehearsing answers only he could hear. They looked relaxed, at home, like this place had been built with them in mind. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. I wasn't nervous. That surprised me. Somewhere along the way, after enough closed doors, nerves give way to something quieter. Acceptance, maybe, or clarity. I wasn't here to impress anyone anymore. I was here because I still believed I had something to say, even if no one wanted to hear it. A voice called my name. The conference room was larger than it needed to be, dominated by a long table that separated the interviewers from the candidates like a line already drawn. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, but the blinds were half closed, muting the light. 3 people sat at the far end. At the center was the CEO. Late 50s, composed eyes sharp but distant. To his right sat the head of strategy, her posture, rigid hands folded precisely. To his left was a younger executive, no older than early 30s, glasses, thin-framed confidence resting easily on his shoulders. I took the chair opposite them. The introductions were quick, efficient, names, titles, a brief overview of the role. No small talk, no attempt to put me at ease. That told me everything I needed to know. They had already moved on. The questions came fast, but they weren't curious questions. They were confirmatory ones. Why did you leave your previous role? What have you been doing since? How comfortable are you with our current data platforms? I answered honestly. I always did. I spoke about family, about responsibility, about adapting when life forces you to choose between ambition and obligation. I talked about analysis done without dashboards, about patterns noticed before algorithms could name them. Their expressions didn't change. The younger executive glanced briefly at the CEO, then back at me. And you don't have a graduate degree? No, I said. I don't. A small note was made on a legal pad. The sound of pen on paper felt louder than it should have. The strategy lead leaned back slightly. Our environment moves very fast, she said. We're looking for people who can keep up with constant innovation. I nodded. Of course. but what she meant was clear. Innovation meant new. New meant young. And young didn't look like me. The CEO checked the time, subtle but deliberate. That was it. The signal. The quiet agreement that this conversation had reached its end before it had ever truly begun. I felt the familiar weight settle in my chest. Not anger, not bitterness, just the recognition of a door closing again. I thanked them for their time. I meant it. Courtesy costs nothing, even when it isn't returned. As I shifted in my seat, preparing to stand, I noticed something change in the room. A vibration almost. A pause. The CEO's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. His expression tightened. The strategy lead leaned forward slightly. The younger executive straightened alert. A message. Short. Urgent. Whatever it was, it mattered. I sat back down without being asked. And for the first time since I walked into that building, I felt something shift, not in my favor, yet not even close, but away from the neat, predetermined ending they had planned for me. The interview wasn't over after all. They didn't say they were rejecting me. Not yet. But every question that followed was designed to make the decision feel inevitable. The CEO folded his hands on the table and looked at my resume again, this time more slowly, as if rereading it might somehow change what it said. "You've been out of the industry for almost 10 years, he said. His tone wasn't accusatory. It was factual clinical. "That's a long gap." "It is," I replied. "I won't pretend otherwise." The younger executive leaned forward, interest sharpening behind his eyes. "Technology moves fast," he added. "Tools, platforms, entire markets can change in 2 or 3 years. How do you stay relevant without being in the system?" There it was. The question beneath the question. How do you stay useful when the world has already moved on without you? I stayed close to people, I said. Customers, small business owners, operators. I watched how decisions were actually made, not how reports said they were. The strategy lead's lips pressed together, polite but unconvinced. She scribbled something on her pad, then looked up. "But you weren't working with enterprise-level data. Not at this scale." "No," I said. I wasn't. Silence settled over the table, heavy and deliberate. They were stacking evidence now, building a case that would sound reasonable when summarized later. Career gap. No advanced degree. Outdated experience. Cultural mismatch. The CEO nodded slowly. "We're not questioning your intelligence," he said. "But this role requires a certain pace, a certain fluency." Fluency. Another careful word. Not wrong, just selective. I knew what fluency meant in this room. It meant speaking the language of dashboards and projections of growth curves that always pointed upward. It meant being comfortable with complexity for its own sake. "I understand," I said. And I did. I understood that this wasn't really about whether I could do the work. It was about whether I fit the picture they had already drawn of who should be sitting across from them. The younger executive flipped his laptop slightly toward himself, scrolling. "You mentioned earlier that you left your previous role for family reasons," he said. "Would you consider that a distraction if something similar happened again?" There it was. The unspoken fear made visible. Responsibility as liability. "I consider it a responsibility," I answered. "Not a distraction." He smiled thinly, as if humoring a sentimental point. In high-growth environments, personal stability matters. I almost laughed at that. Almost. Instead, I nodded again. I wasn't here to debate philosophy. I was here to survive the room with my dignity intact. The questions continued, but they lost their edge. They were no longer probing. They were closing. Each one circled back to the same conclusion, just from a different angle. I could feel the meeting slipping toward its polite ending, the kind that ends with handshakes and no callbacks. I thought about the other candidates in the waiting area, how effortlessly they belonged, how their resumes probably glowed with uninterrupted progress, clean timelines, familiar logos. They had done everything right. I had done what life demanded instead. The CEO glanced at the clock again. This time, he didn't bother to hide it. "We appreciate you coming in," he said. "I think we have what we need." That was the line, the one I'd heard before. The sentence that meant thank you, but no. I inhaled slowly, preparing to stand. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of explaining gaps as if they were crimes. Tired of pretending that stepping away to do the right thing needed justification. As I shifted my chair back, the CEO's phone buzzed again. Louder this time, insistent. He frowned, picked it up and read the message. The change in his face was immediate. The calm certainty drained, replaced by something sharper. Concern, maybe, or irritation. The strategy lead noticed it too. "What is it?" she asked quietly. The CEO didn't answer right away. He stood, walked a few steps toward the window, then turned back. "The Valoran partnership just pulled out," he said. Effective immediately. The room changed. The younger executive straightened fully now. "What?" "That's not possible. We just finalized the projections." "They've withdrawn," the CEO said. "Cited concerns over user retention forecasts." The strategy lead shook her head. That model was validated twice. "Apparently not enough," the CEO replied. I froze halfway between sitting and standing. Valoran. I knew that name. Everyone in the industry did. Conservative, loyal, slow to move, but impossible to win back once trust was broken. The younger executive was already typing furiously. "Their concern doesn't make sense," he said. "Our data shows stability through Q4. The CEO's jaw tightened. "They're seeing something we're not." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't polite. It was dangerous. I should have left. Every instinct told me to take my quiet exit and let this storm pass without me. I was still an outsider, still an interviewee who had already been dismissed in all but words. But as they spoke over one another, fragments of their explanation catching in the air, something uncomfortable settled in my mind. A pattern. A familiar one. User retention. Forecasts. Stability curves. I had seen this before, years ago with a different company, a different product, and the same blind confidence in averages that smoothed away the truth. I remembered the warning signs, the early drop-offs that were dismissed as noise, the loyal customers who didn't complain, didn't churn loudly, just disappeared. The CEO turned back toward the table. "We'll deal with this internally," he said, regaining his composure. I'm sorry, I said before I could stop myself. All three of them looked at me. The younger executive's eyes narrowed. Yes, I felt the weight of the room press down on me. I knew exactly what I was risking now. Speaking would not earn me a job. It might earn me a security escort. "I know I'm not part of this," I said carefully. "But the reason they pulled out it isn't unpredictable behavior." The CEO studied me silent. "It's very predictable," I continued. "If you're looking at the wrong people." No one interrupted me. Not yet. I swallowed. My heart was pounding now, loud enough that I wondered if they could hear it. If Valoran is concerned about retention, it's not because your users are leaving in general. It's because a specific group is. The strategy lead folded her arms. "And which group would that be?" I met her gaze. "The ones who've been with you the longest." The room didn't explode. It didn't erupt into shouting or laughter. It went still in a way that felt far more dangerous. The CEO didn't tell me to leave. He didn't dismiss me. He just said, "Explain." And in that single word, the rejection that had been waiting for me cracked open just enough to let something else in. No one spoke for a moment, as if the room itself needed time to decide whether I had just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The younger executive was the first to react. He leaned back slightly, arms folding across his chest, a faint smile tugging at one corner of his mouth. With all due respect, he said, emphasizing every syllable, our user base is thoroughly segmented. We've modeled behavior across demographics, usage, frequency, device type. If there were an issue that significant, it would have shown up. I nodded. It did. The strategy lead turned her chair a few degrees toward him. This isn't the time, she said quietly. We can't troubleshoot a major partnership collapse based on speculation. It's not speculation, I replied. I hadn't meant to sound firm, but the words came out steadier than I expected. It's a pattern. The CEO remained silent, eyes fixed on me, not hostile, but measuring. I'd seen that look before years ago on executives who hadn't yet decided whether to dismiss you or test you. It was the look of someone weighing risk against inconvenience. You said this was predictable, he said, finally. Go on. The younger executive opened his mouth to object, then closed it again. The CEO had spoken. That was enough. I drew a slow breath. You're looking at aggregate retention, I said. Overall stability. But stability can hide decay if you don't know where to look. Your average numbers look fine because your newer users are compensating for the ones quietly leaving. The strategy lead frowned. Quietly leaving. Yes, I said. The customers who don't complain. The ones who don't flood support channels or post angry reviews. They just stop logging in. They don't make noise. They don't give you a chance to fix anything. The younger executive shook his head. We monitor churn. You monitor churn in volume, I said. Not in loyalty. That earned me a sharper look. The CEO gestured for me to continue. Who are they? He asked. These users you're so sure we're missing. The ones who've been with you 10 years or more, I said. They adopted your product when it was simpler. When it solved one problem well instead of 10 problems poorly. They didn't sign up because it was innovative. They stayed because it was reliable. The room was quiet now. Not dismissive quiet. Listening quiet. The strategy lead tapped her pen against the table. We've added features because the market demands innovation. You've added features because younger users tolerate friction, I replied. Long-time users don't. They adapt once or twice. After that, they feel punished for being loyal. The younger executive let out a short laugh. That's anecdotal. It's experiential, I said, and it's measurable. The CEO straightened in his chair. How I felt the moment sharpen. This was no longer commentary. This was a challenge. You rolled out a major interface update 6 months ago, I said. Streamlined navigation, more customization, deeper analytics. It tested well with new users. The strategy lead nodded. Our adoption metrics were strong. For the first 8 weeks, I said. Then the curve flattened. The younger executive's fingers paused over his keyboard. You dismiss that as normalization, I continued. But if you isolate users over 55 who'd been active for more than 5 years, you'll see a different curve. A slow decline starting week 9. No spikes, no complaints. Just disengagement. The CEO turned toward the younger executive. Pull that segment, he said. There was hesitation. Brief, but visible. Then fingers moved again. As data populated the screen, I watched their faces shift. Confusion first, then focus. The younger executive leaned closer, scrolling back and forth. That can't be right, he muttered. The strategy lead stood moving to stand beside him. Filter by tenure, she said. Not age, tenure. The numbers adjusted. The room felt smaller, suddenly, as if the walls had inched closer. That's exactly when Valorant reduced usage, the CEO said quietly. I nodded. They're conservative by nature. They don't panic. They observe. When they saw their own teams struggling to adapt, they didn't complain. They reconsidered. The younger executive looked up at me, Now the smile gone. Why didn't this trigger alerts? Because your alerts are tuned to volatility, I said. This was erosion. The CEO stood walking slowly behind his chair. So you're saying we didn't lose them because of performance? No, I said. You lost them because you stopped feeling familiar. The strategy-led exhaled slowly. We were told complexity equals value. It does, I said, for people who enjoy learning systems, not for people who just want to do their jobs and go home. Silence stretched again, but this time it was heavy with recalculation. The CEO stopped pacing and looked directly at me. If you're wrong, he said, you've just wasted everyone's time. I know, I replied. And if you're right, he continued, you've just pointed out a failure that traces back to this room. I didn't look away. I know that too. The younger executive cleared his throat. Even if this is accurate, he said, what are you suggesting? We can't roll back 6 months of development. I'm not suggesting a rollback, I said. I'm suggesting relief. Explain. You don't need to remove features, I said. You need to stop forcing them on everyone. Give long-term users a familiar path. Let them opt into complexity instead of drowning in it. The strategy lead shook her head slowly. That goes against our growth narrative. It goes with your revenue reality, I said. The CEO studied me for a long moment. Then he glanced at the clock, not dismissively this time, but decisively. How long would it take to prove this? He asked. To model, I said. Minutes. To test days. The younger executive interjected, we don't have days. The CEO turned to him. We just lost a partner worth 8 figures, he said. We have time. He looked back at me. You said this was predictable. Prove it. A murmur of tension ran through my chest. With what data? The same data we've been using, he said. You get 10 minutes. The strategy lead looked startled. 10 minutes. If he's wrong, the CEO said we lose 10 minutes. If he's right, we might get Valoran back. He faced me fully now. If you can't prove this, the interview ends. Immediately. I nodded once. My mouth was dry, but my mind was sharp. This wasn't theory anymore. This was the moment everything hinged on. As the younger executive slid his laptop toward me, I felt the weight of every closed door I'd walked away from settle behind me. I placed my hands on the keyboard steady. All right, I said, let's start with week 9. And as the numbers began to shift on the screen, I knew this room would never look at me the same way again, one way or the other. The room seemed to lean in as the timer began, 10 minutes suddenly feeling both generous and cruel. I focused on the screen, blocking out the presence behind me, the quiet pressure of 3 careers, waiting to see whether I would collapse or confirm what I'd already said. My fingers moved quickly, not from confidence, but from familiarity. I'd done this kind of work before long, before it had names that sounded impressive. Start with tenure, I said more to myself than anyone else. Then isolate usage frequency after the update. The younger executive hovered near my shoulder, arms crossed, watching every movement, as if waiting for a mistake he could seize. You're assuming behavior correlates directly with interface changes, he said. That's rarely the case at scale. It is when the change interrupts habit. I replied, eyes never leaving the screen. Habit is stronger than satisfaction. I pulled up the usage timeline, then filtered again. The lines shifted subtle at first, almost polite in their decline. No cliff, no panic, just a steady retreat. The kind that rarely triggered alarms, because it didn't look dramatic enough to matter. There, I said, pointing. That's where it starts. The strategy lead leaned forward, squinting. That's barely a deviation. Because you're still averaging it with new users, I said. Watch what happens when you remove them. The graph redrew itself. The slope sharpened. Silence fell dense and uncomfortable. That's not churn, the younger executive said quietly. That's disengagement. Yes, I said. And disengagement doesn't announce itself. It waits until it's irreversible. The CEO stepped closer, his presence now directly behind me. I could feel it solid and unignorable. Why didn't support see this? He asked. Because no one complained, I said. They assumed the difficulty was on their end. When people feel embarrassed by a system, they don't call for help. They leave. I clicked through another layer: time of day usage, session length, task completion. Each metric told the same quiet story. Longer pauses, more retries, fewer returns. These users didn't fail, I said. They got tired. The younger executive exhaled sharply. That's not how we framed it. No, I agreed. You framed it as optimization. The strategy lead straightened slowly. Anne Valeron. They're exactly this group, I said. Long tenure, high reliability, low tolerance for disruption. When their internal teams started struggling, they didn't escalate. They evaluated. And they decided you weren't listening to them anymore. The CEO's jaw tightened. We built this update for growth. And you achieved it, I said. Just not with the people who trusted you first. The timer on the screen blinked. 4 minutes left. The younger executive cleared his throat. Even if we accept this, he said, we can't undo the rollout. I'm not asking you to, I replied. I'm asking you to stop treating complexity like progress. He scoffed. So what we freeze development. No, I said. You give users choice. Familiar paths for those who want stability. Advanced paths for those who want depth. You let loyalty feel rewarded instead of punished. The strategy lead looked down at the data again. That would slow innovation. It would anchor it, I said. Innovation without anchors drifts. The CEO raised a hand, cutting off the debate before it could escalate. What would Valeron need to see to reconsider? Recognition, I said, and relief. A signal that you understand why they hesitated. Not a new feature, a concession. The younger executive frowned. Concessions look like weakness. They look like listening, I replied, and listening is what they didn't think you were doing anymore. The timer chimed softly. Time was up. No one spoke right away. The CEO stared at the screen, then at the faces around the table, then back at the screen again. The weight in the room shifted, no longer pressing down on me alone. Finally he straightened. This, he said slowly, was not what we were told. The strategy lead met his gaze. No, she said. It wasn't. The younger executive looked unsettled now, his confidence recalibrating in real time. We should verify this against historical reports. We will, the CEO said. Then he looked at me. But not before we ask the question. We should have asked months ago. He paused. Why didn't anyone catch this? No one answered. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was exposed. I stepped back from the table, hands finally still. My pulse was loud in my ears, but my voice came out calm. Because it wasn't a data problem, I said. It was a perspective problem. The CEO nodded once, almost imperceptibly. And you, he said, saw it because you weren't looking for trends. I was looking for people, I replied. He studied me for a long moment, then turned toward the others. We're not ending this interview, he said. We're changing it. The younger executive opened his mouth, then closed it again. The CEO faced me. You've just made yourself very inconvenient, he said. And very difficult to ignore. I didn't smile. I didn't thank him. I simply nodded. For the first time since I'd walked into the building, I wasn't the one being evaluated anymore. The tension didn't break when the CEO spoke. It shifted. The younger executive was the first to push back, straightening, as if reclaiming ground. With respect, he said, we can't let anecdotal interpretation override months of quantitative work. What you're describing sounds more like nostalgia than analysis. I turned to face him. Nostalgia doesn't show up in retention curves, I said. Behavior does. He shook his head. You're assuming older users define long-term value. That's not how growth works anymore. And that, I replied, is exactly the generational mistake that keeps repeating itself. The strategy lead interjected quickly. Let's be careful here. This isn't about age. It's about scale and speed. No, I said. My voice stayed calm but firmer now. It's about perspective. You're optimizing for users who adapt easily. You're neglecting the ones who built your base. The younger executive let out a short laugh. That base isn't our future. I met his eyes. It's your foundation. And foundations don't complain when you crack them. They just give way. The room stiffened. The CEO watched the exchange, closely saying nothing. He wasn't refereeing. He was studying. You're talking about loyalty like it's a metric, the younger executive said. It isn't. It is, I said. You've just never measured it correctly. He leaned forward. Then enlighten us. Because what I see is someone who hasn't worked at this level in a decade, telling us we've been doing it wrong. I felt the weight of that land. It wasn't an insult. It was a dismissal wrapped in professionalism. I stepped away. I said, not down. And while you were learning how to read dashboards, I was watching how decisions ripple through real organizations, factories, clinics, schools, places where people don't have time to relearn tools every quarter. The strategy lead crossed her arms. Those environments aren't comparable. They are when trust is involved, I said. And trust doesn't reset with every update. The younger executive's jaw tightened. So what are you suggesting? That we slow down because some users can't keep up? I shook my head. I'm suggesting you stop confusing speed with progress. The CEO raised his hand slightly, silencing the room. Enough, he said. He looked at me. You're challenging a core assumption of this company. I know, I said. And I know what that costs. He held my gaze. Do you? Yes, I said, because I've paid it before. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence was divided. Two sides had formed without anyone naming them. On one side, acceleration disruption, the language of momentum. On the other, continuity habit, the human cost of change. The CEO turned to the younger executive. What's the risk if he's right? He hesitated. We would need to rethink how we define engagement. And if he's wrong, we lose time, he said, and credibility. The CEO nodded, then looked at me. And what's the risk for you? I didn't hesitate. I leave here with nothing. Same as I expected when I walked in. The honesty of that seemed to unsettle them more than anything else I'd said. The strategy lead exhaled slowly. You're asking us to admit we missed something fundamental. Yes, I said. And I'm saying that missing it doesn't make you incompetent. Ignoring it now would. The younger executive looked away, frustration flickering across his face. You make it sound simple. It is simple, I replied. It's just not easy. The CEO leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. You know what this sounds like, he said. I waited. It sounds like a challenge to how this place thinks, he continued. Not just to one project. That's because it is, I said. Another silence followed, longer than the others. Outside the glass walls, the city moved on, unaware that anything inside this room was changing. Finally, the CEO stood. We're not resolving this today, he said, but we're not dismissing it either. The younger executive looked sharply at him. You can't be serious. I am the CEO, replied. He turned to me. You've created friction, and friction is uncomfortable. He paused. But it's also how you find what's slipping. He walked to the window, staring out for a moment before speaking again. This interview was supposed to end 20 minutes ago. He turned back. Instead, it's turning into something else. The strategy lead glanced between us. What exactly are you proposing? The CEO looked at me. That depends, he said, on whether he's willing to stand behind what he's saying when it's no longer theoretical. I felt the shift again, sharper this time. This wasn't about being heard anymore. This was about being tested. I am, I said. The CEO nodded once. Good, he replied. Because from here on out, if this goes wrong, it won't be a model that fails. He looked directly at me. It'll be you. I didn't look away. The CEO didn't raise his voice when he laid out the terms, and that made them heavier. You said this was predictable, he said, standing at the head of the table. So here's what we're going to do. You get one chance to prove it. 10 minutes. No new tools. No external data. You work with what we already have. The younger executive shifted in his seat. That's not enough time to validate anything meaningful. It's enough time to see if he actually knows what he's talking about. The CEO replied without looking at him. Then his eyes returned to me. If you can't demonstrate this clearly, the interview ends. Right here, no follow-ups. I nodded. I understand. And if you can, he asked. The room held its breath. Then we continue, he said. Nothing more. No promises. No titles. The strategy lead leaned forward. And if this analysis disrupts the broader roadmap? That's my problem, the CEO said. Not his. The younger executive let out a slow breath. You're giving an outsider access to internal projections. For 10 minutes, the CEO said, and you'll be watching every second. The laptop was slid toward me again, this time deliberately. The screen glowed with rows of data that most people would need hours to contextualize. I didn't ask for clarification. I didn't ask for permission. I placed my hands on the keyboard and began. The timer started. I filtered by tenure first, then by task repetition. I ignored surface engagement and went straight to completion patterns. The younger executive hovered closer now, his earlier confidence replaced by something sharper, defensive. You're skipping a lot of variables, he said. I'm skipping noise, I replied. If the signal is real, it'll survive that. The strategy lead glanced at the CEO. This isn't how we usually, I know, the CEO said. Let him work. I isolated the period immediately after the update, then overlaid it with help desk interactions, not volume, but timing. The curve shifted again, subtle but unmistakable. There, I said. That pause. That's hesitation. The younger executive frowned. That could be anything. It's confusion, I said. It's the moment someone stops and asks themselves whether they still know how to do their job. The CEO leaned closer. Show me Valoron. I pulled their internal usage data, narrowed the window, and removed outliers. The decline appeared exactly where I'd expected it to. That's when they stopped training new teams, I said, not because the product failed, because it became unpredictable. The strategy lead's expression tightened. We assumed their reduction was temporary. They didn't assume, I said. They tested. Quietly. The timer ticked down. 4 minutes. 3. The younger executive straightened. Even if this is true, it doesn't justify changing direction. It justifies acknowledging reality, I said. Direction means nothing if no one's following. The CEO held up a hand, silencing him again. What happens if we do nothing? I didn't hesitate. You'll replace the users who leave. For a while. But the ones you lose now won't come back. They'll tell others not to trust you. 2 minutes. The strategy lead swallowed. And if we adjust, you stabilize, I said. Not by adding more, by clarifying what's already there. The timer chimed softly. Time was up. No one spoke. The laptop screen still displayed the last set of curves frozen mid-decline, like evidence left on the table. The CEO straightened slowly, his face unreadable. The younger executive broke the silence first. We need to audit this properly. We will, the CEO said, but not to decide whether it's real. He turned to me, only to understand how we missed it. I felt the tension ease just slightly. Not relief, recognition. You said you were willing to stand behind this, the CEO continued. This is where that starts. He looked around the table. The interview isn't over. It's changed. Then he faced me again. From this point on, you're not here to explain. You're here to test your own conclusions. The younger executive opened his mouth to object, then stopped himself. If this goes wrong, the CEO said it won't be theory that fails. He paused, letting the words settle. It'll be you. I nodded once. That's fair. For the first time, no one in the room looked at me like a candidate anymore. The 10 minutes were over, but the room didn't release me. Instead, it closed in. The CEO remained standing, hands resting lightly on the back of his chair, eyes fixed on the screen, as if the data might rearrange itself if he stared long enough. The strategy lead had stopped taking notes altogether. The younger executive, still nearest to the laptop, scrolled back and forth through the same section again and again, as if repetition might produce a different outcome. It's too clean, he said finally. Real behavior isn't this neat. It is when people don't complain, I replied. Messy behavior comes from frustration that wants to be seen. This is resignation. He looked up sharply. You're assigning emotion to numbers. No, I said. I'm recognizing the absence of reaction. The CEO turned toward me. Explain that. When people are angry, they push back, I said. They flood support. They demand fixes. When they're tired, they disengage quietly. They don't want a solution. They want relief. The younger executive leaned back, rubbing his jaw. We've always treated silence as satisfaction. And that's where the mistake lives, I said. Silence is only safety when trust is intact. The strategy lead moved closer to the screen, her voice lower now. Walk me through the sequence again. I did. Slowly this time. I showed them the week-by-week progression, the slight increases in task, retries, the longer pauses between actions, the gradual shortening of sessions. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming on its own, but together, unmistakable. This is where people hesitate, I said, pointing. This is where they start to feel unsure. And this, I highlighted another section, is where they stop coming back. The CEO exhaled through his nose. And we missed it because your dashboards reward speed, I said, not comfort. That landed harder than I'd intended. The younger executive straightened. Comfort isn't a growth strategy. No, I agreed, but discomfort is a churn strategy. The room went quiet again, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer adversarial. It was evaluative, calculating. The CEO finally sat down. You're suggesting that our core assumption is wrong, he said. That complexity doesn't signal value to everyone. I'm saying it signals exclusion to some, I replied, especially to the people who trusted you before you learned how to impress investors. The strategy lead looked up sharply. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious oversight, I said, and it's fixable, but only if you admit it exists. The younger executive stood pacing a few steps before stopping. Even if we accept this framework, he said, there's no guarantee Valoron comes back. No, I said, but there's a guarantee they won't if you ignore it. The CEO tapped the table once, slow and deliberate. What would you change first? The question caught the others off guard. It caught me, too. I wouldn't change the product, I said after a moment. I'd change the default. He raised an eyebrow. Let your long-term users start where they're comfortable, I continued. Make the advanced features optional, not mandatory. Let familiarity be a privilege of loyalty, not a penalty. The strategy lead frowned. That would create parallel experiences. Yes, I said, and that's not fragmentation. It's respect. The younger executive stopped pacing. "And if usage still declines, then you'll know it's not the interface," I said. "But right now you don't know that. You assumed it." The CEO leaned back, folding his arms. He studied me for a long time, not as an interviewer now, but as someone reconsidering a decision already made. "You're not asking for permission," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm asking you to stop mistaking confidence for certainty." Another pause. Outside, a siren wailed faintly, then faded. Inside, the air felt heavier, charged. The CEO finally looked at the younger executive. "Run this against the last 2 quarters," he said. "Separately, no averaging." The younger executive hesitated. "That'll take time." "We have time," the CEO replied. "We just proved that assuming otherwise is expensive." The strategy lead closed her notebook. "If this holds," she said carefully, "we'll need to revisit more than one roadmap." The CEO nodded. Then he looked at me again. "You said you've seen this before." "I have," I said. "And every time the company thought the market had changed." And it hadn't. "No," I said. "They had." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood again, this time slower, more deliberate. "You didn't come in here to challenge us," he said. "I came in to answer your questions," I replied. "They just changed." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth before disappearing. "So they did." He turned toward the others. "We're not ending this discussion today. And we're not pretending it didn't happen." Then he faced me fully. "You've bought yourself time, not trust, not a position." He paused. "Time." I nodded. That was more than I'd expected when I walked in. As the younger executive reopened his laptop and the strategy lead began outlining next steps, I realized something else had shifted. The room no longer felt like a place I was being judged. It felt like a place that had just been interrupted. The room no longer belonged to assumptions. The younger executive sat back down, his movements slower now, as if speed itself had lost some of its authority. He pulled up additional reports without being asked, cross-referencing quarters that had previously been summarized into single reassuring averages. The strategy lead stood beside him, her earlier rigidity replaced by something more cautious, more alert. "This can't be coincidence," she said, quietly studying the screen. "The decline lines up too cleanly." I stayed where I was, hands folded loosely in front of me. "It's not coincidence," I said. "It's consistency. That's what makes it dangerous." The CEO remained silent, watching the data unfold, as if seeing it for the first time, even though it had been in front of them for months. "We've always trusted our dashboards," he said at last. "They've never failed us like this." "They didn't fail," I replied. "They did exactly what they were designed to do." He looked at me. "Which is reward motion," I said, "not meaning." The younger executive stopped scrolling. "You're implying the system itself is biased." "Yes," I said, "toward speed, novelty, and surface engagement, not toward endurance." The word lingered. The strategy lead straightened arms, crossing slowly. "Endurance doesn't excite investors." "No," I said, "but it keeps companies alive long enough to matter to them." She didn't argue this time. The CEO leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Walk me through what happens if we ignore this," he said. "Not hypothetically, practically." I met his gaze. "You'll keep acquiring new users," I said. "Your growth charts will look healthy, but the cost of acquisition will rise. Support will grow more complex. Your most reliable customers will disappear without telling you why. And one day you'll realize your base no longer trusts you to stay stable." The younger executive frowned. "That's a slow collapse." "Yes," I said. "The worst kind." "Because it doesn't feel urgent until it's irreversible." The room absorbed that in silence. Outside the glass walls, people passed by unaware of the recalibration happening inside. The CEO finally turned to the younger executive. "Run the same filters on the other enterprise clients," he said, "not just Valoron." The younger executive hesitated, then nodded. All of them, all of them. As the data refreshed, patterns emerged again. Not identical, but familiar. Small declines clustered around the same update window, the same quiet erosion. The strategy lead pressed her lips together. We explained this away as normal fluctuation. Because no one wanted to ask why it was happening, I said. Asking would have meant questioning decisions already made. The CEO's eyes didn't leave the screen, including mine. I didn't respond. This wasn't the moment for reassurance. The younger executive leaned back slowly. "We weren't wrong about innovation," he said. "We were wrong about who it was for." That was the closest thing to an admission I'd heard yet. The CEO stood again, this time with purpose. "We built this company on trust," he said, "long before we built it on technology." He turned to me. "You saw this because you weren't measuring success the way we were." "I wasn't measuring success," I said. "I was measuring strain." The strategy lead glanced at me. "And what happens if we relieve it?" "Then the people who left quietly come back quietly," I said. "And the ones still holding on stop questioning whether they made a mistake by staying." The CEO nodded once. "That's something we can test." The younger executive looked uneasy. "Testing this means diverting resources. It means prioritizing reality," the CEO replied. He turned to me again. "You understand what you've done here?" he said. "Yes," I said. "I've made it impossible to unsee." A faint smile crossed his face, brief and unguarded. That's usually when things start to change. The strategy lead closed her laptop. "We'll need to rethink more than one metric." The CEO nodded. "We will." He paused, then added, "But not today." The room exhaled collectively. The tension didn't vanish, but it settled into something steadier. The CEO looked at me with a different expression now. Not approval, not skepticism, recognition. "You didn't come here with a solution," he said. "No," I replied. "I came with a warning." "And you delivered it," he said. For the first time since I'd entered the building, no one looked at me as an interruption. I wasn't an anomaly anymore. I was a variable they had failed to account for. The room didn't resist the truth anymore, but it hadn't accepted it either. The CEO remained standing near the window, the city stretching behind him, like a reminder of everything the company had built and everything it could still lose. This didn't happen by accident, he said more to himself than to anyone else. We didn't wake up one day and forget our customers. The strategy lead shifted uneasily. "No," she said. "It happened step by step." The younger executive looked between them, then back at the screen. "Every update was approved," he said carefully. "Every change followed protocol." "Exactly," I said. They all turned toward me. "This wasn't a failure of process," I continued. "It was a failure of judgment." The air tightened. That was the line I knew I'd eventually cross. Questioning a system was one thing. Questioning who had guided it was another. The CEO's gaze sharpened. "Be precise," he said. I nodded. "The decision to push the interface update as mandatory," I said. "The choice to prioritize adoption metrics over completion comfort." Those weren't team-level calls. They came from the top. No one spoke. The strategy lead's fingers tightened around her pen. The younger executive looked down then away. The CEO didn't move at all. "You wanted speed," I said carefully now. "You wanted to show momentum. And you assumed the people who mattered most would adapt without complaint." The CEO finally turned to face me. "And you're saying I was wrong." "I'm saying the data says so," I replied. And the customers confirmed it by leaving quietly. The silence that followed wasn't defensive. It was exposed. For a moment, I thought he might end it there. call security, reassert control, remind everyone who still held authority in the room. That was how moments like this usually ended. Instead, he nodded once. Slowly. I approved that rollout, he said, against internal hesitation. The younger executive looked up sharply. We flagged risks. I overruled them, the CEO continued, because I believed complexity signaled maturity. He looked at me again. You're saying it signaled abandonment? Yes, I said. To the people who trusted you before the complexity existed. The strategy lead exhaled. If this becomes public, it won't, the CEO said. Not yet. He turned back toward the table. This is why we missed it, he said. No one questions decisions once they've been framed as vision. I said nothing. This wasn't my moment to press further. The younger executive broke the silence. Even if we accept responsibility, he said, what's done is done. Reversing course makes us look uncertain. Refusing to adjust makes us look blind, I replied. The CEO raised a hand, stopping both of us. Enough, he said. Then to me, you understand what you're asking. Yes, I said. I'm asking you to own the mistake. And if I do, he asked, what happens to you when this fails? The question landed harder than any accusation. If it fails, I said, then I leave here as the man who was wrong. The strategy lead frowned. That's a convenient risk. It's not convenient, I said. It's final. The CEO studied my face, searching for hesitation. He didn't find it. You're not asking for protection, he said. No, I replied. I'm asking for permission to prove I'm right. Another long pause. The hum of the building's systems filled the space, steady and indifferent. Finally, the CEO nodded. All right, he said. We do this properly. The younger executive stiffened. Do what exactly? The CEO looked at him. We test his assumptions on a real segment with real users. The strategy lead's eyes widened. That's risky. So is pretending this didn't happen, he replied. He turned to me. You'll design the test, he said. Limited scope, no announcements, no spin. And if the numbers don't move, the younger executive asked. Then he leaves, the CEO said without hesitation. He looked back at me. And if they do? The room waited. Then the CEO said, we admit we've been solving the wrong problem. He extended his hand, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement of the terms. You wanted a chance. This is it. I took it. The handshake was brief, formal, heavy with consequence. As he released my hand, the CEO added one final thing. Understand this, he said. If this succeeds, it won't just change a project. I met his gaze. It will change how this company makes decisions, he finished. I nodded. That's the point. And in that moment, I knew the real test hadn't started yet. They didn't call it a job offer. The CEO made that clear immediately. This isn't a position, he said, sitting back down at the table. It's an assignment, short-term, controlled, and very visible. I nodded. That's fair. The strategy lead glanced between us. What exactly does this assignment involve? A test, the CEO said. Designed by him. He looked at me. You said this could be validated in days. I'm giving you that window. The younger executive frowned. You're letting him define the scope. Yes, the CEO replied. Within limits. All eyes turned to me again. The room had gone from resistance to expectation, and that shift felt heavier than any skepticism before it. We select a single enterprise segment, I said, users with long tenure, high reliability, and declining engagement since the update. We restore familiarity for them, not by removing features, but by reordering access. The strategy lead tapped her pen thoughtfully. A parallel experience. A respectful one, I said. They don't need to feel like beginners in a system they helped grow. The younger executive leaned back, arms crossed. And how long before we see results? Fast, I replied. If I'm right, they've been waiting for permission to stay. The CEO nodded once. You'll have access to the necessary data and one internal liaison. He glanced at the younger executive. You. The younger executive stiffened. Me. You know the system best, the CEO said, and you'll make sure nothing goes beyond scope. I met his eyes. There was no friendliness there yet, just professionalism edged with caution. That works, I said. The CEO stood. This stays quiet, he continued. No announcements, no internal messaging. If this leaks, it's over. It won't, I said. The strategy lead looked at me closely. And if the metrics don't move, then I leave, I said. No arguments. The room absorbed that. The finality of it settled in slowly. This wasn't a probation period. It was a single shot. The CEO picked up my resume again, then set it aside. You understand how unusual this is? Yes, I said. That's why it matters. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded. You start tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word landed with quiet force. The meeting ended without ceremony. No congratulations, no reassurance. People gathered their things, already shifting back into execution mode, as if the last hour had simply been another meeting on an already full calendar. As we walked out together, the younger executive slowed beside me. You know this puts you directly in the line of fire, he said. I was already there, I replied. He gave a short, humorless smile. If this works, people will say it was obvious. And if it doesn't, I asked. They'll say it was inevitable. We reached the elevator. He pressed the button, then hesitated. For what it's worth, he said, I didn't think you'd last 5 minutes in that room. I didn't either, I said. The elevator doors closed behind us, and the ride down felt different from the one that morning. Not lighter, sharper. Every floor passed like a countdown. When the doors opened, the lobby looked the same as before. Polished, indifferent, efficient. But I wasn't the same person walking through it anymore. I wasn't an applicant hoping to be chosen. I was a variable inserted into a system that had never planned for me. Outside, the air felt colder than I remembered. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in, letting the reality of what I'd agreed to settle. 3 days, I thought. That was all it would take to prove whether experience still had a place here, or whether I really was as outdated as they believed. The results didn't announce themselves with alarms or sudden spikes. They crept in quietly, the way real change often does. On the first morning, nothing looked different. The dashboards refreshed as usual, the numbers moving within expected ranges. The younger executive, my assigned liaison, stood nearby, arms crossed, watching as if waiting for something to break. I didn't blame him. If this failed, it wouldn't just prove me wrong. It would validate every assumption the company had made about people like me. By midday, the first sign appeared. A small increase in session completion among the long tenure users we'd adjusted for. Nothing dramatic. Easy to dismiss. The younger executive frowned at the screen. Could be noise, he said. Could be, I replied. By the end of the first day, the pattern held. Not a surge, a stabilization. The slow decline that had worried me for weeks flattened out. Users weren't doing more, they were stopping less. The second day was harder to ignore. Support tickets from that same segment dropped. Not because people had given up, but because they no longer needed help navigating what they already knew. Session times shortened, then normalized. Task retries decreased. Familiarity did what complexity never could. The younger executive stopped hovering. He sat down beside me instead, scrolling silently, recalculating assumptions in real time. This isn't acquisition, he said finally. This is retention recovery. Yes, I said, that's what relief looks like. By the third morning, the CEO asked for an update. We stood in the same conference room where the interview had almost ended before it began. The atmosphere was different now, less defensive, more deliberate. The strategy lead listened without interrupting as the numbers spoke for themselves. These users didn't need to be convinced, I said. They just needed to stop feeling punished for staying. The CEO studied the screen for a long moment. And Valeron. They've increased internal usage again, I said. No announcement, no statement, just behavior. The room went quiet. The younger executive leaned back slowly. We assumed loyalty would tolerate anything he said. Turns out it just tolerated silence. The strategy lead nodded. We mistook patience for permission. The CEO looked at me, then really looked at me, not as a consultant or a temporary problem solver, but as someone who had altered the room. You didn't save a project, he said. You exposed a blind spot. I didn't respond. This wasn't the moment for satisfaction. We're not rolling this out, company-wide, he continued. Not yet. That's wise, I said. But we are changing how we evaluate decisions, he added. Effective immediately. The younger executive glanced at me, something like respect flickering across his face, before he masked it. You know this won't make you popular. I didn't come here to be, I said. The CEO stood. You came here to be right. I shook my head. I came here to be useful. That seemed to matter to him. Later that afternoon, as people returned to their desks, conversations shifted. Not loudly, not openly, but when I spoke, people listened. When I asked questions, they paused before answering. No one dismissed me as outdated anymore. They didn't call me brilliant either. They treated me like something rarer in this building relevant. As the day wound down, the younger executive walked with me toward the exit. They'll say this was inevitable, he said. That the data was always there. It was, I replied. That doesn't mean it was seen. He nodded. You know what they won't say. What I asked, that they almost sent you home. I smiled faintly. That part doesn't matter. Outside, the city moved on, as it always had, unaware of what had shifted inside a glass building most people would never enter. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the evening air, feeling the weight lift, not because I'd won, but because I'd been heard. Tomorrow there would be more work, more resistance, more proving. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't fighting to stay in the room. The room had changed around me. Nothing changed all at once, and that was how I knew it was real. There was no announcement, no email congratulating anyone, no sudden shift in titles or seating arrangements. The building looked the same. The routines stayed intact. But the way decisions slowed down, that was new. People paused before pushing updates. They asked quieter questions. They listened longer than they used to. A few days later, the CEO asked to speak with me privately. Not in the boardroom this time, but in a smaller office overlooking the city, the blinds half open. He didn't offer a speech. He didn't need one. You were right, he said simply, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be heard. I nodded. About some things, about the ones that mattered, he replied. We mistook momentum for understanding. There was no apology in his tone, but there was something rarer in places like this accountability. He told me the test would expand slowly, quietly. No press, no grand narrative. The company would adjust the way it measured success, starting with how long people stayed, not how fast they clicked. When I left his office, no one clapped. No one stared. But as I walked past conference rooms and desks, conversation softened. People made space when I spoke. Not because of authority, but because something had shifted in how they saw me. I thought back to the moment I'd stood in the lobby, convinced the interview was already over before it began. I hadn't been wrong. I just hadn't known the ending yet. The truth is, I wasn't chosen because I was smarter. I didn't outcode anyone. I didn't overwhelm them with theory. I paid attention to the people who were easiest to ignore, the ones who didn't complain, who didn't demand attention, who simply left when things stopped making sense. That's a quiet kind of intelligence, the kind that doesn't trend, the kind that doesn't announce itself, but it lasts. As I stepped outside that evening, the city lights flickered on, one by one, steady and patient. It reminded me of the users who had stayed long after they felt lost, hoping someone would notice. This time, someone had. If you've ever been dismissed in a room where you knew you belonged, you're not alone. Sometimes, being underestimated isn't a sign that you're behind. It's a sign that you're seeing something others aren't ready to face yet. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been overlooked only to realize later that you were holding the missing piece all along? Share your experience in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about people who were underestimated, ignored, or written off, only to quietly change the outcome, stay with us. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join the conversation. There are more stories waiting to be told, and sometimes all it takes is one voice willing to speak when the room has already made up its mind.